The next section of Module 7 focuses on typography, and there are a number of pages in the module book that you really need to read over carefully. There is a ton of terminology related to typography, and a decent number of these terms are going to be on the final exam because they're very important. Typography is a very deep subject that many colleges teach as single class or multiple classes in the subject. We don't have much time to cover it, but that does not mean it isn't important. Typography in general is the art or technique of arranging type that focuses on, of course, the legibility and the communication of whatever you're doing with that type. And so there's a lot of terms, again, that come up with this. If you scroll through, you'll see that as an example, there are certain styles of type. And these include terms like Roman. So if you've ever looked up a particular typeface and it shows up as Times New Roman, that's where the Roman part comes from. Roman is synonymous in the case of typography with book or normal or regular. So depending on the particular typeface you're dealing with, it could be Times New Roman, or it could be Gill Sans regular that you see right here. You won't typically find a single type family that has Roman, book, normal, and regular, of course, all in the title because that's all basically the same term. In a similar way, we have italics. Italics is meant to be, obviously, it's a slanted typeface. It's roughly and beautifully emulating handwriting. And most people who are right-handed have a rightward slant to their type. An alternate term that's used for italic is oblique, but in many cases, obliques are used when we're talking about typefaces that don't have a true italic. You will find a few typefaces that have a true slant style type that are called something or other oblique, and they tend to be sans serif, which is some of our newer type styles. We'll talk about what that means later on. But Roman or book or regular, italic or oblique, we have all of the different boldfaces, and there's lots of terms that fall under the boldface heading. Bold, black, heavy, poster, semi-bold, medium, demi-bold, ultra, etc. Are all thicker than your average typeface. So they're thicker than a regular. Italics are more slanted than a regular. Bolds are bolder than a regular. Light, similarly, would be obviously thinner than a bold, but it's also going to be thinner than a regular or a Roman. We have condensed, which are horizontally compressed. Looks a little bit like you took your hands, put it on either side of the type, and squashed it. It is narrower in terms of width than the standard or the Roman style would be. And extended is exactly the opposite. It's horizontally stretched. And so you'll see those. And again, those are common styles within a typeface or a font family. We have type categories, which are the next big group. And there are 5 that we really focus on. We have the serif, which have these little heads and feet. Extensions off of the typeface. They actually can be traced back to Roman stone carving, but you'll see them in a lot of contemporary typefaces, most of which were originally created prior to the 20th century. A lot of these serif typefaces even date back to about the 15th century. So there is some history there. They're very readable. They are often more legible to people at a lower literacy level than our next group down, and these are the sans serif typefaces. Sans is S-A-N-S. It is from the French. In French, it means without. So a sans serif typeface, and my sister speaks French and she finds the pronunciation here hideous, but in English we say sans serif. It means without serif. So there is no serif on a sans serif typeface. They are often monoweight, meaning if you compare this to the capital T in the serif category, there are some thick and some thin lines happening there. In this sans serif and in many sans serifs, they're all of even weight throughout a character. There tends to be no slant to it. It's not to say that it's impossible, but there tend to be no slants, and in some of the serifs you'll find a little bit of a character tilt. It's not a massive one, but it's pronounced in certain of the lowercase characters. Often the O actually is the one that has a little bit of an axis shift. And they can be more modern in appearance, although some of the sans serif typefaces are a couple of hundred years old at this point. So modernity only means more modern than the serif ones. We have script typefaces, which are the fanciest of all of our typefaces. They have extreme slants, they have extreme thick and thin variations most often, and in general, they should not be used in all uppercase. They are specifically designed and meant to look like cursive handwriting. Cursive handwriting is not meant to be all caps, and neither are your script typefaces. They also, because they have such extreme thick and thin variation, typically don't work tiny, and they should generally therefore not be used for body copy. Decorative or display is two separate categories that we sort of mush together. They are detailed. They don't fit comfortably within a lot of the other categories, so they're not a clean serif, they're not a clean sans serif, and then they're not a script. They may have lots and lots of edge detail. They are meant to be used at a large size, and they don't, as a result, work well for body copy because they need the size, and body copy is rarely 36 point or above, which is usually what we're talking about when we look at some of these decorative or displays. Symbol typefaces are exactly what the name sounds like. They are non-text-based characters. The one exception to this is the very top line that's shown within this symbol typeface section, and that's because this font is called Symbol. It's Greek and Latin characters that are sort of interspersed with more traditional Roman characters. They are nonsensical largely, and you can't do any clear written messages with them. But the rest of the typeface, when you talk about symbol-based typefaces, it's actual symbols, it's characters, it's graphicals. It could be map symbols, lots of different things, and you'll find a lot of variety there. They can form really nice page graphics, which is one of the nicer things about them. When you're measuring type, we're working in a different type system. It's the point and pica system. It's used to measure really, really tiny things. If you had to refer to the size of your type and start to get into the hundredths or thousandths of an inch, it's really cumbersome, and that's why this type system exists. A single inch consists of 6 picas. Each pica consists of 72 points. I'm sorry, 6 picas is 72 points. Each pica is 12 points. So you multiply 6 times 12 to get to the 72. So 12 points to the pica, 6 picas to the inch. And this is still the system that's used when we refer to type size. So if you ask how large the typeface should be, and somebody says do it in 14-point type, that's the points they're talking about. As part of this system, again, because using the inches is just, it's too small a number to deal with there. So it allows you to get down and really minutely control how your type looks and make really fractional adjustments without fighting with how that's going to work. We have additional things with type that we need to consider, and this has somewhat to do with spacing. I'll let you read about EM and EN dashes on your own, but basically one is twice the space of the other one. And that takes us into some more important spacing terms that are commonly confused. We have tracking and we have kerning. Kerning is used to adjust the spacing between two specific text characters. So if I were trying to fix the space between this capital T and the lowercase a, I would put my cursor right there and I would adjust the kerning to bring the a and the t closer together. The same thing would happen if I were trying to adjust the spacing, for example, between the T and the W in 2. If you need to adjust the spacing between more characters, then you're getting into a different concept, and that's called tracking. So kerning is between two different characters. Tracking is over a number of characters. You're trying to space them all out. And examples of each of those are shown on 44 and 45 and into page 46. Leading is our next spacing terminology, but in the case of leading, you're talking about the amount of spacing between lines of text. And leading dates back to the way type was originally set, starting with Gutenberg in about 1450. So we're talking about individual strips of lead that were put between the lines of type. If you needed more space, you needed more strips of lead, hence leading, even though obviously we're not using lead strip or individual lines of type that are set in lead type anymore. The term persists, and it's sort of interesting sometimes to help you remember it of where it comes from. And it is spelled as the element is spelled, L-E-A-D, lead, and then ing. So it's not leading, it's leading. All right, so examples of all the different amounts of leading are shown. Typically, for comfortable leading, you're talking about the size of the type. In this case, it's listed as 10. The next number, so it's 10/12, is 10-point type with 12-point leading. 1010 is a little uncomfortable. The descenders and ascenders of the type are getting really close together. It looks really compressed and a little uncomfortable. 1012 is a little bit more open, not a lot. 1014 is a good bit more open. And 1016, which is the last example on the bottom of 147, is the most open. There is a happy medium between too tight and too loose. The text actually becomes less easily read as it gets too far apart. And if I had to pick one of these for my personal preference, I would go probably with the 1014. There is obviously some sort of concept of subjectivity here, but in general, you want leading that allows the text to be readable and a little bit more welcoming without it taking up too much space. And that's one of the things that a designer has to balance very often. Next big category that we deal with is text alignment. And with alignment, we have several major categories. It has to do with how the left and the right-hand edges of your text is going to look. With justified text, which is what's being shown at the bottom of 148 here, we have text that is even on the left and even on the right, as is the body copy that we're looking at here. The problem with this is it has a tendency to create funky little gaps within. And that is just one of those things that has to be dealt with when you're dealing with justified text. It's common for magazines, it's common for newspapers, it's less common for other types of text because it is a little bit more difficult to read. We have flush left, which is the most common type alignment style you would have seen. The text has a straight left edge and a ragged or uneven right edge. So one of the things that's true of flush left text is that it can also be called ragged right. Flush left, ragged right are the same thing because one edge is straight, the left one, the right edge is uneven, and in this case we have a weird inverted pyramid that's being formed because of the way that the lines end. That can become really distracting in certain cases too, so there's some challenges there. We have the exact opposite, which is flush right or ragged left, where you have a straight right edge and an uneven or ragged left edge. And then we have centered text. Centered text is in the middle of whatever. The difficulty with centered text is that it is often overused by new designers who don't really know what they're trying to do. And often it is the most cautious solution and rarely the most visually interesting. So it's overused by people that are less familiar with the other styles and that don't really know how else to deal with the text. So avoid it when you can. If you can try one of the other alignment styles, it's great for invitations, but it's one of those things that maybe isn't great for other stuff. Stacked letters in general should be avoided because they're not really designed to be used well in this way, because the characters are of variable width, and as a result the I, for example, here looks really skinny relative to the T and the G, and it throws the balance off. If you're gonna have to use text, you really need it to run more vertically, then the recommendation is rotate the text 90 degrees and run it that way. You then are able to keep the more deliberate and intentional orientation of the text and still make it more visually interesting. And several examples of that are shown on page 151. There's a lot more here about text hierarchy. Look through those examples, understand what they're talking about, and then look at some of the additional type crimes, which are text that's too small, text that's not in an appropriate typeface, and all that kind of stuff. But for all those, you really need to look at the examples and kind of understand what it's going for. One of the items that shows up, and all of you probably know this because you've learned this rule from online, don't constantly use all caps. They should be used when you're trying to gain someone's attention, obviously with online, or shout at them, not a continuous all capathon, because readability is really not good in that case, and so forth. So more and more and more, you can create graphics using type. And then we have many pages talk about typeface combinations. Not going to go through all those because, again, you need to look at the examples and read the small text. But there are some tricks to choosing type styles that work well. In general, pick things from 2 different categories, and that's a safe a safe choice. Now, what that takes you to once you get through all of the type information is assignment number 50. I'm going to stop the video and restart specifically with assignment 50, but definitely don't skip over all the type stuff leading up to this.